On your Monday episode of Locked On Raptors, we still don't talk about Giannis on this podcast unless the insiders are doing it.
You are Locked On Raptors, your daily Toronto Raptors podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Hey! What's going on? And welcome to another episode of Locked On Raptors, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. It is Monday, June the 2nd, and I am your host, Sean Woodley. I've been covering the Toronto Raptors now for 11 seasons on various platforms. You can find all my work over on Blue Sky. You can find the show on Instagram. You can join us, of course, in the Locked On Raptors Discord server, which is definitely not talking about Giannis today. 100% free to join. Come be part of our listener community. Link in the description of the podcast. As always, today's show is brought to you by our friends over at Monarch Money. Take control of your finances with Monarch Money. Use code LOCKEDINNBA at monarchmoney.com for 50% off your first year. And on today's show, we'll a little later on sort of air some grievances regarding Pascal Siakam making the conference or the NBA Finals and winning Eastern Conference Finals MVP, which is all awesome. But the retconning of the Raptors Siakam divorce, that's annoying to me. We'll talk about that a little bit later on. But off the top, we are going to get into some Giannis stuff because, yes, this podcast does not talk about Giannis Antetokounmpo because it's not happening. There's just no way. But when Brian Windhorst says stuff, when Doug Smith and the Toronto Star drops little lines with information that are, going to get spun out of control by every aggregator in the world, we got to do our due diligence here. So we will talk about the latest Giannis Antetokounmpo scuttlebutt. And we'll get into the question of what is too much to give up for Giannis if you're the Toronto Raptors. Let's start by reviewing the reports / comments / I don't know if it's full-on reports. It's just, again, rumors, noise, subterfuge, etc., etc. Brian Windhorst on the episode of the Hoop Collective that dropped, I guess, yesterday, last night, this morning, whatever, talking about the NBA Finals. The topic of Pascal Siakam came up, which we'll get into a little bit later on as well. But off of that, Brian Windhorst did his Brian Windhorst thing and just kind of subtly alluded to the Raptors. Yeah, like they're kind of hunting for big fish. That's like the league is aware that they're kind of poking around on stuff, trying to find a big fish this summer. Which I don't know if is a terribly huge surprise, considering Giannis Antetokounmpo is going to be available or potentially is going to be available. We don't know that for sure just yet. He hasn't declared that he wants out of Milwaukee, and we'll talk about why that's a prerequisite for anything to happen. But when Brian Windhorst says stuff, it's clearly there's something going on. There's something in the information channels of the NBA suggesting the Raptors are poking around, and two and two together, Giannis has been a guy that Masai Ujiri has fawned over for over a decade. He might be the single biggest star available this summer, maybe the only real star available this summer, at least only obvious one. And yeah, it might be that the Raptors try to go and pursue that for sure. Makes a lot of sense. Then Doug Smith and his mailbag in the Toronto Star over the weekend had a little quip, little line at the end of his piece answering a question about Giannis from a reader. Just kind of said, there's mutual interest between the Raptors and the Bucks. Sorry, the Raptors and Giannis Antetokounmpo of potentially linking up with one another. That's interesting. If there's mutual interest, for sure. That is, I think, one thing that you would definitely need for Giannis to end up at Toronto is for him to put Toronto on a list of teams that he wants to go to. Because, obviously, I think the Bucks are going to try their best to facilitate a move that he's happy with, considering all he's given to that franchise. But also, the Raptors don't have the number one clear best package out there. We'll talk about that here too. And, in order for this to happen, you would have to think that Giannis handpicking the Raptors or putting them on a short list of teams has to be sort of step one for the Bucks considering what the Raptors might have on offer. So look, these reports, this noise, this slop, shout out to our friends at Ball. Like, this doesn't change anything to me. Like, this really does just kind of, add more fuel to the fire, all that stuff, add more smoke to everything. But overall, like, I don't think this really changes what we kind of know regarding Giannis and the Raptors. We know that Masai has long been after him. We know the Raptors have some potential maneuverability with, contract flexibility and all their picks available this summer. And we know that there are other teams out there that if they really want to go and make this a full-scale bidding war, are probably going to have more to offer the Milwaukee Bucks than the Toronto Raptors. And I don't think any of this changes that. You can reference back to my episode a few weeks ago with Camille Davis from Locked On Bucks. We talked about the whole landscape of the Giannis situation. And obviously this all hinges on whether or not Giannis actually says to Milwaukee, please trade me, I want out. If he doesn't do that, the Bucks ain't doing it. The Bucks are not moving on if Giannis doesn't explicitly say, get me out of here now. And he just might not do that. We haven't heard it happen yet. Maybe it still will. But that is sort of the first domino that has to fall here. Then for the Raptors to really be in the mix here, a couple other things have to happen. You have to have some other teams with better packages to offer get cold feet. The Oklahoma City Thunder are probably the team that has the most stuff if they really wanted to do it, to go call up the Bucks and say, hey, here's everything for Giannis. Let's make this happen. If the Thunder decided to get involved with their horde of draft picks and their young players, they probably are the leaders in the clubhouse to get it done. They're in the NBA Finals. They have what looks like a very long runway set up for this team. They're not trading for Giannis this summer. It would be a deeply un-Oklahoma City Thunder-esque thing to do. And had they lost in the second round to Denver, maybe there's an open window of opportunity for that to happen. They're in the finals. They're the favorites to win the finals. I don't think anything is happening to change the core of that Thunder team going forward. So if they're off the board, then okay, then there's some more teams that maybe the Raptors can try to hang with. But still, I think two teams outside of Toronto have the edge if they really want to come correct to the table with everything on offer for Giannis. The first of those teams is the Houston Rockets, who have the all-important Phoenix Suns picks for the future. Like two or three of them going forward, unprotected Phoenix Suns picks, which will be highly prized, one would think, if the Milwaukee Bucks are moving on from Giannis. The Bucks do not have their own picks. A reminder, they cannot just trade Giannis and tank. They have to be shorting other teams around the league, and you probably don't want to be shorting the team you're sending Giannis to, because the Bucks know better than anybody else that simply having Giannis on your team is going to win you in the mid-40s at the very least. You're not going to be a bad bottom-of-the-league team, barring some catastrophic injury. The Bucks this year were kind of a mess. Not very deep. A whole lot of AJ Green and Gary Trent Jr., and they still won 48 games. Like, Giannis is just a cheat code to make you above 500. And so if you're sending him to a team, you probably don't want to be betting against that team, at least in the immediate future, with the hope of your entire rebuild hinging upon that team failing. And so that is the edge the Rockets have over the Raptors. I know I've relitigated this before. Maybe there's new folks tuning in, looking for the lay of the land on this. The Rockets, if they come and put those Suns picks on the table, plus whatever young players, whether it's Amen Thompson, Jalen Green, Alperen Sengun, some combination of them, those Suns picks are involved. You'd have to think that's going to be the offer the Bucks are most eager to take, because they need those bets against teams that are likely not going to be good in the next few years because they don't have their own picks to use and tank with. Then you have the Spurs, who, of course, moved up to number 2 in the draft lottery. And if they want to put up that second overall pick and say, hey, we can't offer you the same quality of picks necessarily, that we do have picks from the Wolves a few years out and the Hawks and some other teams like the Kings. There's a pick in there. If they want to go and say, hey, yeah, we can't give you those amazing picks down the line, but hey, we give you the second pick in this draft and get you Dylan Harper, and you can kind of start your rebuild around him day one. You just draft Dylan Harper and move on. Then, hey, maybe that's something the Bucks find attractive as well. I still think the Spurs, if they really wanted to do it, have more to offer than the Raptors that would interest the Bucks. And then I think the Raptors are right there in that next tier of teams. There's the Nets out there, for example. I don't think they're going to get into it, because if they trade for Giannis, they will have no one for Giannis to play with at all. It'll be a whole lot of Giannis plus, Cam Thomas, Giannis plus Day'Ron Sharpe. No, I don't think the Nets are in a position to make this trade and actually have it benefit them going forward. And I do think the Raptors are very much in that next tier of teams, with their likely offer that centers around Scottie Barnes, probably RJ Barrett for salary matching, and then all the picks the Bucks want. And we'll get into in just a second here whether that is too much to offer for the Raptors based on where they're at, and what actually would constitute the happy medium offer. It's not too much, it's not too little. It kind of satisfies the Bucks while also setting the Raptors up for some success were they to land Giannis. We'll get into that to continue this show coming up in just 1 second. Today's show is brought to you by friends over at Monarch Money. Ever check your bank account and wonder, where did all my money go? Between dining out, online shopping, and entertainment, it's easy to lose track. That's where Monarch Money comes in, your personal CFO, giving you full visibility and control over your finances. Monarch is not just a budgeting app, it's a complete financial command center. You can track all your accounts, investments, and spending in one place, so you stop just managing your money and start building wealth. I've said it on the podcast before, but having a child soon, and that's going to put, as I understand it, a little more stress on the finances. And it's going to be great to use Monarch Money with that full look at all the accounts that I have, my wife has, that we share together to keep track of where our money's going, even though all of it's definitely going to diapers and stuff. We'll be able to keep track of that beautifully with that command center from Monarch Money. Take control of your finances with Monarch Money. Use the code LOCKEDONNBA at monarchmoney.com for 50% off your first year. That's monarchmoney.com, code LOCKEDONNBA for half off your first year. Go check it out. Back out here on your Monday edition of Locked On Raptors, talking Giannis, even though we don't talk about Giannis on the podcast. Building off of the Brian Windhorst, Doug Smith scuttlebutt, Doug Smith noted in there that there's mutual interest between Giannis and the Raptors, and that the wild card is the cost. Obviously, like, this is what it's all going to come down to. If the Raptors are in the mix here, they're going to have to be willing to pay up, because again, the Milwaukee Bucks, like, there's no incentive for the Bucks here to just trade Giannis for a poo-poo platter of stuff. They don't have their own picks. Having Giannis on their team, like, they're one way or another, they're kind of set up for a few dark years, just as, like, you know, the post-Giannis era. Like, it's going to be tough. They don't have their own picks. They don't have a lot of young players. It's going to be a grim few seasons in Milwaukee, no matter what the return for Giannis is, in all likelihood. And so when you're staring down that reality, you know, you could have your next 5 years be grim without Giannis, or you can just keep him and have your next 5 years be grim with Giannis if he's into it, if he's not agitating for a move explicitly. And so you're going to have to pay up. And there have been reports of John Horst, the GM with the Bucks, wanting to bleed the other team dry wherever he sends Giannis. Of course, he's going to say that. That's a great public negotiating tool. It's not going to be a report out there saying John Horst is willing to accept nothing for Giannis. Of course, you got to kind of think of where all of these agendas lie when you hear, you know, reporting and stuff come out like this. But when it comes to the cost for the Raptors, look, I think if you can get Giannis, you just got to get Giannis. There's almost not a cost enough to make me kind of turn my nose up at it, because he's Giannis. Even if it doesn't make you a day one instant contender, and it just might in the Eastern Conference, let's be clear, the East stinks. Even if it doesn't do that, the mere idea of having Giannis play for the Toronto Raptors is tantalizing and fun and interesting enough for me to have a really hard time coming to a point where, like, I just think on, like, pure price, you could overpay for Giannis Antetokounmpo. Obviously, you could get super ridiculous, and, you know, but, like, in terms of, like, realistic outcomes here, I don't think you can really overpay for a guy who is no worse than the third best player alive and is still very much at the peak of his powers. The problem is you have to do all you can to optimize the roster that Giannis is coming to, and that is where the price comes into play here. I don't see there being a move here that does not involve Scottie Barnes at a minimum. There's for a few reasons. One, the salary matching is just way easier with him. If you make the trade after July 1st, when his new deal is kicked in, the salary matching gets so much easier. It can just be Scottie plus one other guy, probably RJ Barrett, and you can make it work financially before you throw in all the sweeteners, picks, young players, et cetera, et cetera. If it's not Scottie, then, you know, Brandon Ingram's involved. I don't think that makes a lot of sense, because I think Brandon Ingram, in theory, is like an excellent fit next to Giannis. We just saw Chris Middleton, a big creative wing with some mid-range pop and some self-creation juice, be an absolutely perfect co-pilot for Giannis Antetokounmpo in Milwaukee. And I think Brandon Ingram would be, I think, an essential figure on a potential Giannis Raptors team in order to optimize him, optimize the window with Giannis in Toronto. So yeah, I don't think Ingram is involved, even if I'm not sure if it's 100% legal, because he just signed his extension. But I don't, one way or another, legal or not, I just don't think that makes sense for either side here. You know, I don't think Emmanuel Quickley is going to be part of the piece here going out, just because, like, you need to have, like, competent guard play skills, and Quickley is not a top of the league level guard or anything like that, but playing next to Giannis, playing next to Ingram, that'd be damn helpful to have his shooting, his, again, baseline competence as a ball handler, run, pick and roll, that type of stuff. Like, you got to have that on your team. We've seen this team be so light on guard talent for years now. And I just don't see a world in which you're building a team with Scottie and Giannis and Jakob Poeltl and not having a point guard on the team. Like, even if he's not your traditional point guard, I think he's closer to that than people give him credit for. That's just not a functional team build. And again, like if you trade for Giannis, you're not going to have like a ton of other options and moves ready to line up for you. It's not to say they'll never be able to make trades or improvements on the roster. They will have that ability as time goes on. You go through multiple transaction cycles, more picks become available down the line as the years go on. They'll have means by which to improve the team. But if you trade for Giannis, like that's your big swing. That is most of your ammo going out the door. You better have a pretty ready-made team to go and at least be competitive. I don't think it has to be a trade where you're like, we have to win the championship next season or anything like that. This isn't the Kawhi deal. This would be more of a long game play where you give yourself at least a few years while Giannis is still in his prime to continue to build around him and tinker and adjust the roster and all of that. Hopefully young guys improve, et cetera, et cetera. And by year 2, year 3, year 4 of him in Toronto, maybe you're like a full-fledged inner circle contender because you've made the right moves and you've kept enough on the roster. But one way or another, they're not going to have a ton more flexibility if you bring Giannis in for financial reasons, for, again, just not having the assets to go make more moves. And so whatever the return is, whatever you're sending out, it can't be so much that it tilts the balance away from the team being functional once you finally land Giannis on your team. I really think, again, I've pitched this on the show. I think if a trade happens here, RJ plus Scottie as the baseline of the package just makes way too much sense. RJ plus Scottie for Giannis and Bobby Portis, who has a player option going into this summer. Maybe he picks it up to help facilitate this along. Maybe he picks it up because I'm not sure anyone's paying Bobby Portis this summer. But that works just as a pure salary matching piece before you throw in picks. And then young players obviously will have to get considered here as well. But that makes sense to me. Scottie plus RJ. You bring Giannis back. You run out essentially a team with Quickly and Ochai Agbaji, a really nice fifth starter, I think, in this context. Brandon Ingram, Jakob Poeltl, Giannis, and then your bench, you've got Jamal Shed, hoping he makes a step or two in the years to come. Jacoby Walter, Grady Dick, Jonathan Mobo, Jamison Battle, in this case, Bobby Portis, and then you fill out the rest of the roster with minimums and stuff like that. That team is good enough to be a 50-plus win team in the Eastern Conference next season, I think. Giannis is that good. There's enough depth there. Obviously, injuries and stuff can happen, but I think Giannis is good enough to carry that team to at least a middle-tier playoff seed in the Eastern Conference, comfortably in the top 6. Beyond that, you have to really hope for internal growth. And that is why, in this instance, this is, again, price-wise, if Jacoby Walter or Grady Dick need to be involved in that deal, fine. It makes sense. 100%. I get why the Bucks would say that, and they wouldn't be wrong to say they got to be involved. But that's kind of where I start to get cold feet a little bit if I'm the Raptors, because the internal growth and development of that your second year guy and Grady Dick going into year 3, Jacoby Walter, a rookie going into year 2, their capacity for internal growth over the years is one of your single best ways to theoretically improve the team around Giannis. And if those guys are gone, one or both, then I think your roster gets a little thinner. You're trading away more roster players to bring one back, kind of reversing the depth they've kind of built over the last year and a half here, and really putting all your eggs in the Giannis basket and hoping that you can get lucky in the second round and with undrafted free agents and whatever picks you do have in the coming years. That's a lot. That's a lot to ask for. It's a lot of leaving stuff up to hope. If you've got Walter and Dick on the team and you've just gone Scottie plus RJ plus a bunch of picks, I think that is kind of the sweet spot. Again, if it's one of Walter or Grady, I think you probably just have to do it because it's Giannis. But it's and again, it's not that's too much to pay for Giannis type of thing, because it's not. You pay for Giannis. He's one of the best players alive. This is what we do this for. This is why you build basketball teams. But you do have to consider what the remaining roster looks like, and they would have to have a pretty clear idea of how they're going to fill in the rest of the spots, have a line on some minimum guys they know they're bringing back or are able to bring in, know what they can do with Chris Boucher, et cetera, et cetera. It's not easy, but I do think there's a team there that is good enough if they can just do the RJ plus Scottie thing, that they can very comfortably run into the next few years and think, hey, we're going to be good now, and there's a capacity for us to be better in 2-3 years from now as well. And then, hey, maybe those guys become people you trade or, in future subsequent trades, things like that, if you're able to hang on to them. And hey, again, if the Bucks say, no, we're not doing this, if you don't give us Walter or Dick, then you'd probably just give one of those guys up and make your peace with it. I'm not against anyone who thinks that's maybe too much because the roster left behind won't be amazing, but I'm also of the mind like, get Giannis on the basketball team. Sounds really fun to me. I don't know. How many more years are we going to do this organized sports thing anyway? Have you seen the world? Like, I don't know. If we can enjoy some fun here watching Giannis play for Toronto and all that comes with it, maybe it's worth it no matter the cost. Either way, still don't think this is happening. I think there's maybe a more of a percentage chance of it happening now, at least in my mind, than there was when, say on lottery night when I thought them dropping to 9 on the lottery kind of ruined any chance of them being in the mix here. It seems like maybe Houston and San Antonio might get cold feet. Maybe the Raptors do come in with the biggest offer. And if that's the case, maybe they can get them on a, quote unquote, buy low for a little bit less than you'd think market price would be for a guy of Giannis's talents. But that requires the Bucks to play ball as well. But yeah, I think like that's the cost, man. It's going to cost you a lot. It's going to cost you all the picks. It's going to cost you the swaps, everything. You might not think it's worth it. There's recent history to suggest that making these trades where you throw all your stuff in for a superstar doesn't always work and can leave you feeling a whole lot of pain on the back end. You'd have to be prepared for that downside for sure. But again, it's Giannis. This isn't 34-year-old Kevin Durant. This is Giannis at the peak of his powers. This is not 33-year-old Damian Lillard, a small guard. This is Giannis Antetokounmpo, one of the best players we've seen this millennium, who's still one of the 3 best players alive. It's a bit of a different story. It's tough though. I get it. Like, it's scary. Wading into these waters, like you're playing with the big fish, man. If you're going to go hunt for big fish, you have to expect that you might get bitten by a shark and plummet to your death at the bottom of the sea for a slow, long decay. With that visceral imagery, let's continue on and talk about Pascal Siakam. We'll leave the Giannis thing for now. We'll talk about Pascal Siakam, and maybe we'll kind of bring it all the way back to Giannis by the time we're done talking about Siakam. But he's the Eastern Conference Finals MVP. It's awesome. Super happy for Pascal. I also think it's extremely stupid how it's being talked about through the frame of the Raptors. We'll get into that to close things out coming up in just 1 second. Back at it here on your Monday edition of Locked On Raptors, talking now about Pascal Siakam, your Eastern Conference Finals MVP. Extremely cool. There's like a pretty real Pascal Siakam Hall of Fame case building here. 3-time All-Star, 2-time All-NBA, been to the finals now twice. Most improved player back in 2018-19. Still a long way to go, but this Pacers team keeps on winning over the next little bit. There's going to be a lot of recognition had for Siakam. I would pencil him in already as an all-star for the next couple seasons in the Eastern Conference, because look at the Eastern Conference. It's pretty awesome, man. Really, really cool to see Siakam thrive in the way he is. And look, I rarely do this. I don't often really respond to national discourse because who cares, right? Yeah, people got to, feed their families by having takes on the Raptors. Hell, I understand that completely. But I also feel like national coverage, this is why the Locked On Podcast Network frankly exists, is national coverage can be very broad, very general, miss the details, miss the context, things like that. And typically, I don't care because, look, I understand that. It's all part of the deal, and I'm glad people can come here for a little bit more of a deep, nuanced look at things than you're going to get on the Hoop Collective podcast, for example. But with the Hoop Collective being top of mind today with the Brian Windhorst stuff from the latest episode, I did want to talk a little about the other stuff that was said about the Raptors and Pascal Siakam and their sort of divorce on that episode of the Hoop Collective. Because I think this is a thing that not just is being said by Brian Windhorst and Tim Bontemps, who, by the way, Tim Bontemps to me is the best national guy covering the NBA. He's the most honest. He's just, people think he's cranky and stuff. No, he's just right and says it how it is a lot of the time. But sometimes I think there are maybe not even things that are 100% wrong, just mischaracterized. I don't know. Let's get into it. So on this podcast, where Brian Windhorst and Tim Bontemps and Tim McMahon are talking about the NBA Finals and Pascal Siakam and the Raptors, they got under the topic of, the Raptors are hunting for a big fish now, even though they had Pascal Siakam, a big fish. First of all, you're talking about Giannis and Pascal Siakam, love Pascal Siakam with all my heart. Very different stories, very different size of fish you're talking about with Pascal Siakam and Giannis Antetokounmpo. So there's kind of a false equivalency off the top. And then Tim Bontemps kind of got into this riff about how Had the Raptors just found a way to keep OG Anunoby, who was awesome in Game 6 of the conference finals, and Pascal Siakam with Scottie Barnes and Fred VanVleet, the team would have looked pretty good. And that's just certifiably not true because we saw it happen. That team was not good. They were fun in the 21-22 season, for sure. They won 48 games, got hot at the end. A weird Precious Achiuwa heater was strangely valuable and important to that run they went on. And then the following year, they were a mess chemistry-wise on the court until they traded for Jakob Poeltl. And then Fred VanVleet walked in the summer. That was a misread of the market for sure. And the Raptors certainly, I think, probably wish they did that one differently now. But that team wasn't good. And then the following year, the OG Siakam Barnes trio just did not work. And the Raptors did not have the stuff in the coffers to go and build a functional team around them. That was a thin team. And this was a team that was kind of painted into a corner, by actions of their own, certainly. The Poeltl trade certainly was a move that boxed them in a little bit and made it even less likely that an OG Siakam Barnes trio was ever going to work. But I think it was getting pretty clear that those three guys, while they had good metrics on the floor together, the fit wasn't right. OG was quite obviously telegraphing he wasn't going to stay. The Raptors didn't have a mechanism by which to extend him at a number he was going to take. And so they traded him before he hit free agency and likely walked away to the Knicks anyway. I think you had to do that. With Siakam, my displeasure with how they handled the Siakam trade has been very, very well-trodden road at this point on this podcast. I think it sucks how they did it. I think if they wanted to trade him, they should have just traded him in the summer before. I think they hurt themselves value-wise. I think they've done a fine job kind of salvaging it, turning Siakam into Brandon Ingram, Jacoby Walter, and Ochai Agbaji, about as good as you could have done considering the situation they painted themselves into. But ultimately, I just, there's a world in which they make it work with Siakam and Barnes in particular. I was a big fan of that duo. I think their fit concerns were a little overblown, but they were there, and it would have required essentially perfect roster building around them to make it all work. And there's a world where they do that and find the right moves, but not this one. They were still a team a couple of years removed from the championship and still paying the tax, not the luxury tax, but just the toll that comes from being a championship team, the first round picks you send out the door, the player development that gets put on pause. This was a team that didn't have a lot in the chest, in the cupboard, to go and continue to build around the Siakam Barnes pair. When the Poeltl thing sort of worked but didn't, and they lost Fred VanVleet for nothing in free agency because they misread the market, that left them with basically no other choice but then to trade Pascal Siakam and OG Anunoby to restock the cupboards, whether with more functional depth on the roster as they found with Barrett and Quickly, or through picks, which they got for Pascal Siakam, that they've then parlayed into more stuff that now the roster is totally transformed from 18 months ago. I think it's in a healthier place overall than it was 18 months ago when that team was not very good and was staring down the barrel of being very expensive. And had you paid Pascal Siakam $50 million like he got from the Pacers, you'd be even more boxed in. And the thing that I find hilarious is that, and there were Raptors fans certainly who were part of this as well. I don't know how many are now, turning face now that Siakam's having success, but most of the fan base was pretty done with the Siakam experience. The whole, he's not a number one guy, you got to move on from him thing, which was stupid, but that was a pretty clear consensus take among a lot of the fan base. And then the national perspective on the Raptors around that time was, what are they doing? They've got to pick a direction. They've got to trade their guys away. What have they done here? They picked a direction. And now because Siakam 18 months later is having the success, it sort of changes there's a retconning of how that all went down. I think that's kind of silly. Ultimately, the Raptors did not have a Tyrese Halliburton in store to help lift Pascal Siakam up and amplify his strengths and cover for his weaknesses the way that the Pacers do. Flat out. If the Raptors had a Tyrese Halliburton, then Pascal Siakam is still in Toronto and everyone's very happy. They just, again, they kind of ran out of ways to finish building that team. Put it this way, they spent all their savings for a trip to Disney World, a life-changing, never going to forget it trip to Disney World that was winning the NBA championship. They spent their life savings on that, and you're not regretting that. You're happy you did it. Those are memories that you can't take back. But they had a great time. When they got home, they realized, oh, we kind of need to re-landscape here. And then Scottie Barnes falls in their laps. And it's wow, we really need to add an addition onto this house and redo the backyard. But they didn't have anything left to do that with. There was nothing left in the savings account to go and make those moves with. And so the result is, like, it sucks that they got there, but the result was they had to make some moves to restock the cupboards, replenish the savings, restructure their finances a little bit to then be able to get to a position where they are now, where, by the way, they're in a position, potentially, if you listen to the right people, to go trade for one of the best players alive this summer. That's the flexibility they've created by just having like a bunch of solid players on reasonably sized contracts. Maybe some are overpays, some are slight underpays, whatever. Like, that's the situation they're in now. And I think the way the roster's set up now versus the way it was 18 years ago, when you factor in young players and picks and everything, like 18 months ago versus now, it's obviously now it's the better situation. And Pascal Siakam thriving and winning Eastern Conference Finals MVP doesn't change that just because it's the most recent thing to have happened. And had Tyrese Halliburton got 2 extra votes and won the MVP, we're probably not even having this conversation right now anyway. Good things can happen to other teams and not have it be like a thing that another team screwed the pooch on, I guess, is kind of what I'm coming down here on. And certainly, the Raptors did not cover themselves in glory in those years before moving on from Pascal. 100%, there were failures, there were miscues, misreads of the market, et cetera, held on to guys too long. All of that, as I kind of talked about, in a way, very justified for a team that won a championship and wanted to ride it out as long as they could with the guys who helped them win that championship as their new core. Didn't work out. Whatever. You move on. You don't need to keep on relitigating the past here. Like, I think it's pretty boring. I think it's been well litigated at this point. There were some mistakes. The last 18 months or so, things have gotten back on track. The roster, the team, the depth, everything is in a better position. And again, if they don't make a trade this summer for Giannis, which they're now in position to do because of all of this restructuring they've done, they can't pull that off, then hey, they're still going to go into next season with a very reasonable case to be a top 6 team in a not very good Eastern Conference, and they'll still have that same flexibility to go do stuff when opportunities strike down the line. I just why can't it just be that Pascal Siakam is awesome, and that part of the reason he's been so awesome is that he's playing on a team that perfectly accentuates the things he does well, as opposed to it being, well, Pascal's great. That means the Raptors are fools, even more so than they were when they made the trades that we all told them they had to make 18 months ago. It's just silly to me. Anyway, Tim Bontemps and Brian Windhorst are some of the best. We love the Hoop Collective, et cetera, et cetera. But that one was kind of annoying. And I just think, and I know we've done recent episodes relitigating the past. It's probably time to just stop relitigating the past. Except that Pascal Siakam is at a place where he's having success that he would not have had here. Same for OG Anunoby. And the Raptors themselves, yeah, it's a bit of an unorthodox place they find themselves in, but the roster is in way better shape now than it was 18 months ago from a pure upside perspective, with young players and draft picks and guys who they have in-house and are paying at a less than max rate. I think it's all going to be all right, guys. It's really not worth relitigating the past 100 times to make yourself feel worse or feel better. I don't know. We'll leave it there. We'll talk about, I don't know, probably Giannis again tomorrow or something. Or we'll keep on talking draft because, draft's now within reach. It's very close. And we'll keep the prospect profiles rolling. I've got a big board coming very soon here as well. And Vivek Jacob will be back on Wednesday. We'll do some draft stuff with him. We'll play some pick one maybe again. Either way, thank you so much for rocking with the show, following, subscribing, rating, reviewing. It's much appreciated when you support us, however it is you choose to do so. We will talk to you again on Tuesday with another episode of Locked On Raptors. Thanks for hanging. Bye-bye.